January 15th, 2026. For exactly 8 months, a heavy, suffocating silence had hung over the disappearance of Lily and Jack Sullivan. In the small community of Lansdowne Station, Pictou County, Nova Scotia, the case had seemingly gone cold in the public eye. People spoke in hushed tones about the 2 children who had vanished into the dense Atlantic woods, a tragedy that many assumed was simply a heart-wrenching accident of nature. But on this day, the silence was shattered. Court documents that had been under a strict judicial seal were finally opened to the world, and what they revealed was a narrative far more complex and calculating than anyone had dared to imagine. The unsealed records unveiled the execution of 12 search warrants between May 16th and July 16th, 2025. These were not random grabs for information. They were a series of highly specific, strategic strikes aimed at building a picture that investigators never shared with the public. While the community was out with flashlights and whistles, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were quietly diving into the digital and financial lives of those closest to children. They were pulling cell phone records, scrutinizing bank accounts, monitoring highway surveillance, and reviewing hours of school bus footage. It became immediately clear that the RCMP had been investigating far more than a simple missing persons case. For months, the prevailing theory was that Lily and Jack had simply wandered away from their mobile home on Gairloch Road while the adults were sleeping. It was a story of a tragic lapse in supervision, a brief moment of parental exhaustion leading to an unthinkable outcome. But these documents tell a different story. They reveal an investigation that moved with surgical precision. The RCMP Major Crime Unit wasn't just looking for children in the brush. They were considering possibilities they never disclosed to the media. They were looking for inconsistencies. They were looking for a trail that didn't lead into the woods, but perhaps away from them. The timeline begins on May 2nd, 2025. Lily Sullivan and her brother Jack were reported missing from their home. They lived with their mother, Malia Brooks Murray, and her partner, Daniel Martel. At 10:01 a.m. that morning, a 911 call was placed, claiming the children had wandered off. What followed was one of the most intensive search efforts in the history of Nova Scotia. Over 160 searchers were deployed. Helicopters circled overhead, drones scanned the canopy, and cadaver dogs were brought in to sniff through 8.5 kilometers of heavily wooded, unforgiving terrain. Ground teams worked until their boots wore through. Yet, after 6 days of exhaustive effort, the physical search was scaled back. Not a single shoe, a scrap of clothing, or a footprint was found. To the public, it looked like the trail had gone cold. Behind the scenes, however, the investigation was just beginning to heat up. Between mid-May and mid-July, investigators sought those 12 separate search warrants under the Missing Persons Act. Filed with the provincial court in Pictou, these documents were immediately sealed by a judge at the request of the RCMP to protect the integrity of the investigation. It wasn't until January 2026 that media organizations like CBC News and The Globe and Mail successfully applied to have portions of these documents unsealed. What emerged was a detailed account of the RCMP's investigative direction. In Canada, police cannot simply browse through your private records. They require judicial authorization. Under the Missing Persons Act, the threshold for a warrant is lower than in a criminal case, but still requires an investigator to file an affidavit, a sworn statement outlining what they know and why the records they seek are vital to finding the missing individuals. For Lily and Jack, these affidavits show that the Major Crime Unit was skeptical of the wandered-off theory almost from the beginning. The warrants targeted 4 main pillars of evidence: communication, movement, financial activity, and visual documentation. According to RCMP Corporal Charlene Curl, these records were vital because the last time Lily and Jack's location was independently verified was May 1st at 2:25 p.m. This verification didn't come from a neighbor or a family friend. It came from a Dollarama security camera. This is the ground zero of the timeline. After 2:25 p.m. on May 1st, there is zero independent proof of the children's whereabouts. Everything that follows, every meal, every bedtime, and the 911 call the next morning, relies entirely on the statements of Malia Brooks Murray and Daniel Martel. The warrants were the RCMP's way of asking, does the digital evidence match the spoken word? When we look at the first category of warrants, we see the RCMP's immediate focus on the parents' cell phone records. These warrants were filed just 14 days after the disappearance. This isn't just about who Malia and Daniel were calling. It's about the silent data their phones were generating. Investigators were seeking call logs, text message content, internet browsing history, and, most importantly, cell tower pings. In a rural area like Pictou County, cell pings can tell a vivid story of movement. If the adults claimed to be sleeping in their mobile home on Gairloch Road, but their phones were pinging towers miles away, the entire narrative would crumble. The RCMP was looking for concerning topics in internet searches. Did anyone look up how to hide a body? Did they search for how long a child can survive in the woods? Did they look for bus schedules or out-of-province maps? By analyzing the communication data, the RCMP was attempting to build an independent timeline that didn't rely on memory or honesty. They were cross-checking the digital footprint against the verbal testimony. If the phones moved during the window the children were allegedly lost, the RCMP would know. If messages were deleted in the hours before the 911 call, the RCMP would find them. This signaled that within 2 weeks, the authorities were not accepting the family's account at face value. The second pillar of the investigation involved bank records. This is a move often associated with premeditated crimes or missing persons who have actually been relocated. Financial records reveal patterns that the human eye often misses. Investigators were looking for large cash withdrawals that might suggest a plan to flee or pay someone off. They were looking for the purchase of specific, suspicious items, cleaning supplies, heavy-duty tools, or even extra fuel. Sudden changes in spending habits can be a red flag in any major crime investigation. By seeking these records within the first 2 months, the RCMP demonstrated they were treating the household's activities as a potential crime scene in the making, even if they hadn't yet labeled it as such. Perhaps the most startling revelation from the unsealed documents was a warrant for highway surveillance footage. This warrant specifically targeted drivers leaving Nova Scotia between May 1st and May 3rd. Consider the weight of that for a moment. If the police truly believed the children had simply wandered into the woods behind their house, there would be no reason to check the border crossings or the main arteries leading out of the province. This warrant proves that, very early on, the RCMP considered the possibility that Lily and Jack had been abducted or removed from the province entirely. The time frame of this request is telling. May 1st was the last day of verified sighting. May 2nd was the report of the disappearance. May 3rd was the day after. By examining this 3-day window, investigators were searching for any vehicle associated with the family or their associates that might have made a long-distance trip. This expanded the geographic scope of the case from a few square kilometers of Nova Scotian forest to the entire Canadian eastern seaboard. The RCMP was no longer just looking in the brush. They were looking at the highways. Closely tied to this was a warrant for school bus video surveillance. Lily and Jack were marked absent from school on May 2nd, the day they were reported missing, but they were also absent on May 1st. Malia Brooks Murray told investigators the children stayed home that Thursday because Lily had a persistent cough. The RCMP wanted the bus footage to see if the bus had stopped at the house, if the children were visible in the windows, or if anyone else was seen near the property. They were looking for the last confirmed moment these children were seen by an independent witness or captured on a lens. The pattern across all 12 warrants is one of absolute thoroughness. Redacted names of companies and institutions suggest that the RCMP also reached out to internet service providers and perhaps even third-party app developers. This is methodical, major crime work. It is a process of eliminating every single innocent possibility until only the truth remains. However, as of early 2026, the truth remains elusive. While the documents reveal what the RCMP was looking for, they don't tell us what they found. Significant portions of the affidavits remain blacked out with redactions. The results of the searches are sealed under privileged or delayed disclosure rules. Corporal Charlene Curl defended the secrecy, noting that making certain information public could compromise future investigative steps. She admitted that while there were not yet reasonable grounds to believe a crime had been committed, that assessment could change. This is the central tension of the Sullivan case. The RCMP is investigating it like a murder while officially calling it a disappearance. As the investigation into the disappearance of Lily and Jack Sullivan stretched into late 2025, a strange dichotomy began to emerge. On one hand, the RCMP was executing high-level search warrants normally reserved for homicide cases. On the other, they were publicly maintaining that the case was still a missing persons file. This tension reached a boiling point with the revelation of the polygraph results. According to the unsealed documents, both Malia Brooks Murray and Daniel Martel underwent polygraph examinations, commonly known as lie detector tests, conducted by RCMP specialists. The documents state that both adults were found to be truthful on four specific, yet undisclosed, questions regarding the disappearance of the children. In the world of criminal justice, polygraph results are a double-edged sword. While they are not admissible as evidence in a Canadian court of law, they are a vital investigative tool used to clear suspects or narrow focus. If the two people closest to the children pass their tests, it theoretically supports the wandered-off theory. However, the RCMP has refused to release the specific questions asked. According to Corporal Curl, releasing those questions could compromise the integrity of future tests. This suggests that the RCMP isn't finished with their interrogations. This brings us to one of the most vocal critics of the investigation's pace, Criminologist Michael Arfield. Arfield, who has followed many high-profile Canadian disappearances, has expressed public surprise and a degree of frustration at how the RCMP is handling the classification of this case. In his expert opinion, missing persons cases involving young children are almost always deemed suspicious if the subjects aren't found within 48 to 72 hours. By the time a week has passed with no sign of body or a footprint in a concentrated search area, the working theory usually shifts toward foul play. Arfield didn't mince words in his assessment of the Sullivan case, describing the RCMP's approach as novel and suggesting that investigators appear to be pussyfooting around whether or not foul play was involved. From a criminological perspective, if children aren't in the woods after an 8.5-kilometer grid search with cadaver dogs and drones, they are likely somewhere else, or were removed by someone. Arfield's critique highlights the central mystery of the RCMP's behavior. Why keep it under the Missing Persons Act? One reason is the high bar of reasonable grounds. In Canada, to reclassify a case as a homicide or an abduction without a body or a clear crime scene, the police need a specific threshold of evidence that a crime has occurred. Without a confession, a witness, or forensic evidence like blood or DNA from the mobile home, the RCMP is trapped in a legal limbo. They are treating the case with the intensity of a murder investigation, because they have to, but they lack the smoking gun required to lay charges. This leads back to the 2:25 p.m. timestamp at the Dollarama. This moment is the anchor of the entire case. Before that time, Lily and Jack were alive, healthy, and seen by the world. After that time, they essentially ceased to exist in the public record. If the RCMP were to find evidence that the family didn't actually return to Gairloch Road after that shopping trip, or the cell phone data showed a detour to a remote location, the wandered-off theory would evaporate instantly. The polygraph results, while showing truthfulness on 4 questions, do not cover the entire spectrum of possibility. A person can be truthful about not harming someone while still being untruthful about what happened to them or where they are. The complexity of these polygraphs is further deepened by the fact that 7 people in total have now been tested. All 7, including the parents and 5 other individuals close to the family, were found to be truthful. For an investigator, this is a nightmare scenario. If everyone is telling the truth, and the children are in the woods, the logic of the case begins to defy standard criminal patterns. This is why Chief Superintendent Dan Maroro, a veteran of 33 years, stated he has never seen a case quite like this one. It is a rare anomaly where the traditional tools of investigation, searches, tips, and lie detectors, are all returning results that lead to a dead end. By January 2026, the scale of the effort to find Lily and Jack Sullivan had reached staggering proportions. The unsealed documents and recent police briefings provide a window into the sheer volume of data the Major Crime Unit is processing. To date, over 1,030 tips have been submitted by the public. Each of these tips, ranging from sightings in other provinces to theories about local neighbors, must be vetted, logged, and followed up on. In addition to the tips, investigators have conducted 86 formal interviews. These aren't just quick chats on a doorstep. These are recorded multi-hour sessions with family, friends, co-workers, and teachers. The goal is to find a single crack in the story, a detail that changed between May and December, or a person who saw a vehicle they didn't recognize. To support these interviews, the RCMP has reviewed more than 8,100 pieces of video footage. This includes everything from doorbell cameras in Lansdowne Station to gas station feeds across the Maritimes. Yet, despite this mountain of data, the $150,000 reward offered by the government of Nova Scotia remains unclaimed. In most cases of this magnitude, a six-figure reward is enough to break someone's loyalty. It is designed to entice the person on the periphery, the friend who heard a strange comment, the neighbor who saw a trunk being loaded, to come forward. The fact that the money remains untouched suggests one of two things. Either no one knows anything, or the people who do know are so deeply involved that no amount of money is worth the risk of a life sentence. The role of the children's extended family has also become a focal point of the public discourse. Lily and Jack's paternal grandmother, Belinda Gray, has become the face of the grieving family members who feel left in the dark. Gray has been vocal in her frustration, not just with the RCMP's silence, but with the systems that were supposed to protect the children before they disappeared. She has called for a public inquiry that would examine the role of Child Protective Services, raising questions about whether there were red flags in Sullivan home that were ignored long before May 2nd, 2025. The unsealed documents do not explicitly mention child welfare records, as those are protected under different privacy acts, but the RCMP's interest in the household's economic situation and daily routine suggests they're looking at the stability of the home life. This is where the investigation turns from a search for lost children into a deep dive into the why of it all. If there was a struggle in the home, financial, emotional, or otherwise, it provides a motive that the wandered-off theory lacks. As we look at the investigation in its current state, the RCMP is walking a razor-thin line between transparency and tactical secrecy. Staff Sergeant Rob McCannon has been adamant that long-term justice is a priority. This is police speak for, "We are preparing for a trial." If the RCMP releases a piece of evidence now, say, a specific item found during a search or a certain text message, a defense attorney could later argue that the jury pool is tainted. The RCMP is playing a long game, betting that the methodical accumulation of small, circumstantial facts from these 12 warrants will eventually outweigh the lack of a body. The unsealing of these documents was a victory for public transparency, but it was also a sobering reminder of how little we actually know. We know the RCMP looked at bank accounts, but we don't know if the accounts were empty. We know they looked at highway cameras, but we don't know if they saw a white SUV heading for the New Brunswick border. We know they asked 4 questions on Polygraph, but we don't know if they asked a 5th. The case of Lily and Jack Sullivan is a haunting reminder that in the modern age, it is almost impossible to disappear without leaving a trace. And yet, 2 children have done exactly that. The 12 search warrants represent a frantic, brilliant, and silent attempt by the state to find that trace. Whether it leads to a rescue, a recovery, or a courtroom, the groundwork laid between May and July 2025 will be the foundation of the final answer. Until then, the woods of Pictou County remain silent, and the $150,000 reward sits in a government ledger, waiting for someone to tell the truth. As the unsealed documents from January 2026 began to circulate, the public finally got a look at the hidden side of the Sullivan household. While the RCMP had spent months publicly maintaining a neutral stance, the affidavits revealed a domestic situation far more volatile than previously known. Perhaps the most jarring revelation involves Malia Brooks Murray's own statements to investigators. In an interview conducted on May 9, 2025, just 1 week after the children vanished, Malia alleged that Daniel Martel had been physically abusive during their 3-year relationship. She described instances where he would try to block her movements, hold her down, or push her. Most significantly, she claimed he would physically take her phone from her when she tried to call her mother. These allegations, while unproven in court, provide a starkly different context for the search warrants. When investigators were digging into cell phone records and communication patterns, they weren't just looking for clues about the children. They were looking at a power dynamic where one adult allegedly controlled the other's ability to speak to the outside world. Martel has vehemently denied these claims, telling media that the narrative was designed to make him seem evil and that he's been the figurehead of the search for Lily and Jack, putting himself at the forefront of the investigation to help find them. The documents also shed light on the only physical evidence ever found, the pink blanket. For months, the public knew a blanket had been recovered, but the details were vague. The unsealed records reveal that the blanket was actually found in 2 pieces. On May 2nd, the day of the disappearance, 3 family members found a piece of a pink blanket snagged in a tree on Lansdowne Station Road, about 1 kilometer from the home. 2 days later, on May 4th, police made a much more disturbing discovery. Another piece of the same blanket was found inside a trash bag at the end of the family's driveway. The discovery of the blanket in the trash raises a mountain of questions. If the children had simply wandered off with the blanket, how did a piece of it end up back at the house in a garbage bag? This detail is likely why the RCMP sought a blood sample from Daniel Martel for genetic analysis as recently as January 2026. Martel confirmed he provided the sample to be tested against something on a blanket, though he did not elaborate on what that was. The presence of forensic material on a piece of discarded bedding could be the single most important lead in the case, potentially shifting it from a missing persons file to a criminal one. Beyond the forensic evidence, the warrants reveal that investigators were deeply interested in the silent witnesses of a neighborhood.